What's going on, everybody? You know, one of the things that's been really fun about, building this card community, this midlife nation, is the amount of learning that we do from each other. Like when I'm scrolling through comments and I'm reading and responding and I'm reading people's opinions about things that I have to say, I'm constantly learning more. But it's a fun way to learn. It's one of those things like, a good teacher is a person who makes it where you're learning, but you don't really realize that you're learning. And that's kind of what I think reading comments and sharing ideas does, is it helps you to learn from others, learn from their expertise, share your expertise in a way where it doesn't feel like you're just sitting there reading a book to absorb the information. So these Monday videos where I throw out questions to everybody, I'm not trying to lead the witness. What I'm trying to do is genuinely pick people's brains on what they think based on their, previous experience, based on knowledge that they've acquired, things that they have, conversations they've had, sharing their wisdom. And there's so much wisdom in the community. Why not try to, pick something up from other collectors? And that's the fun thing. And that's one of the reasons I'm always stressing, hey, leave a comment. Hey, ask a question. Hey, respond for a featured, Q&A question, or a question where I ask it to all of you. So that's what we have today. And the question I asked to everybody last week, not because I think I know the answer, not because anybody knows the answer, nobody can tell the future, but when we ask things, or when I ask things like this, it's really just kind of to talk about cards. It's a fun concept to talk about. And people say, why are we so worried about what values are going to go up or where the interest is going to go? Just collect what you like. Well, that's fine. But I like talking about cards, and I like talking about, what are your opinions about different types of cards, and what do you think's going to happen with this? None of us know the answer, but it's fun to talk about. And it beats the heck out of some of the, negative things we could be spending our time on instead. So that said, my question from last week was, I really asked, if you look forward 15 to 20 years, do you think there will be a greater increase in demand for cards from the golden age, the golden era of card collecting and baseball, which are really the 50s and 60s, or in pre-war cards? Where is the demand really going to be growing the most, and where is it going to be at? Are more people going to go older and older? Are people going to go newer? That's the question, and you guys had a lot of great responses. Now, as always, I probably had 15 responses that I thought were outstanding that I easily could have featured. I picked 5 for a variety of reasons, and those are the ones I'm going to share with you, and then kind of give my take on those responses and those opinions. That said, I encourage you each week, don't hesitate to leave a comment below. I really think that not just me, but a lot of us want to learn from your opinion, learn from your wisdom, learn from your experience, because it makes collecting and it makes the journey so much more fun when we do it together. Let's take a look at the first response. After a great comment about last week's question, he says, as for this week's question, I think Golden Age cards will still be more popular than pre-war cards. Golden Age cards have the advantage of being easier to understand. In the Golden Age, Topps put out a set every year, as opposed to the mismatch of tobacco, candy, ice cream, department store, etc. cards found in pre-war. Also, it's harder to get the big names for pre-war players. Playing day cards of Ruth, Gehrig, Cobb, Johnson, and Speaker are out of the price range of most collectors. And if pre-war were to get more popular, they would get even further out of range. But for most people, we can afford plain day cards of Mays, Aaron, and Mantle, even in those cards as later in their career. I think that makes so much sense. It's one of those things where it's such an obvious comment. It's so clear, but for whatever reason, I hadn't really even thought about that. And some of you are going, what are you talking about? You hadn't thought about that. Of course, that's a big part of it. Genuinely, I hadn't thought about that. It's a great point. You know, one of the reasons that I think Bowman cards are less, you know, in demand when we're talking about like the 50s than Topps cards is because people grew up with Topps. They didn't grow up with Bowman. They grew up with Topps. They're familiar with the name. It's very simplistic. There's, you know, each year 52 Topps, 53 Topps, 54 Topps. That's one of the reasons that, you know, modern collecting is something I'm not even interested in getting involved with because I don't understand it. There's Topps Update, there's Topps Series 1 and Series 2, there's Topps Chrome, there are so many variations. I don't get it. And it was so simplistic. Really from, you know, 52 Topps to, you know, 1980 Topps. It's kind of easy. Oh, this is the 56 card. This is the 57 card. This is the 58 card. And then, you know, there were some all-star cards, which maybe it's not super difficult to go, oh, this year he has an all-star card. This year he doesn't, you know. And there were high numbers and there were low numbers. But for the most part, it's pretty simple. But I think it's a great point. If you go back to pre-war stuff, there are these sets with these names and it's, you know, N this and M that and E this and E that, like E94, is that E98 or is it E92? Is it N19 or is it N12? And the names that they're assigned, you know, T205, T206, T207. You know, when you talk about the T206, you know, a lot of collectors don't call it the T206, call it the white border set. And the T205 set, you know, is the gold border set. And so my point is, or the point that's brought up is that's a great point. It's confusing. For a while it's Gaudies, and then for a while it's Play Ball, and then Play Ball has some cards that are playing days, but it has some years where they're not all playing days. And then there's, you know, there's such a wide variety, it's hard to wrap your head around. And it requires a lot of work. You know, I was watching Dave, Blue Jacket 66, one of the best, if not the best source of information about pre-war cards of any channel. And he was talking the other day, he was talking about why aren't more people into pre-war cards? And he just simply said, it's because it requires some work. It's not as easy to understand. So it requires a little bit of learning. It's intimidating because you don't know a lot about it and it's not that easy to just immediately pick it up. You have to kind of work at it and learn about it. And then he does lots of videos where he talks about the different sets, talks about different cards from the different sets, where they came from. Did they come out of a caramel or a candy or a chocolate or a, you know, whatever the case may be. Great point. Absolutely fabulous point. 52 Topps to 1980 Topps. It's not confusing at all. But before that, kind of is. It kind of is. I mean, really, 52 Topps is where it got easy to understand. Before that, you got Leaf, you got Bowman. We don't even know what year Leaf was coming out. Was it 48? Was it 49? The Bowmans went from black and white to color, and then they're jumping around, and the design is so dramatically different. It's simple to just collect 50s and 60s Topps. It makes so much sense. Pre-war or golden era? Neither. In 15 to 20 years, the kids today will be older and want to have a hobby that reminds them of their childhood collecting. I wanted to finish building the sets I opened from the 70s as a kid. Also, I think we have a serious issue, altogether, not just baseball cards, that kids seem to not care about history. I'm a history buff, so I love collecting pre-war cards and learning about the players. Today's instant gratification of getting answers from Google, I believe, is not letting kids continue to research as we had to. Mickey Mantle card prices will plummet. The baby boomers, who probably can be responsible for the start of the collecting craze, loved Mickey Mantle. Fathers of the kids now, in their 40s, passed on that love. Kids today won't care as much, so demand will lessen as they get older. Now, I hope I'm wrong. I have a lot of pre-war and vintage cards I will probably have to sell as I get older and retire. So I hope their value will be as high or higher than today. Now, this is an opinion that a fair amount of people have. It's a common complaint. It's a common suggestion as to why vintage era cards are kind of doomed. Now, this is not the only person that's ever said this. This is not the only person who's ever said this to me or on a YouTube channel or in a comments to a YouTube channel. Totally get that line of thinking. Now, as a high school teacher, I totally understand the instant gratification thing. You know, a student will make up a test that's a week late, and before the period ends, they'll ask me if it's in the grade book yet. Even though it took them a week to take it, and then I've had it in my hands for 10 minutes, and I was teaching the whole time of those 10 minutes. So I understand what you're saying. Now, I guess my response is got a few parts to it, and I'm going to just kind of streamline and simplify my response to this. First, you might be right. It's absolutely possible. And I've asked this question to some veteran collectors myself. I asked this question to, my buddy Orlando at a Collector's Dream. I mention him all the time. Why do I mention Orlando all the time? Because he's a great guy. He's got a great channel, and I consider him a good friend. And he has great advice. And when I asked him this question, when I interviewed him on my channel not that long ago, he goes, people have been saying that for 40 years. He says, I was a dealer really before I was a true collector, whatever that means. But he was a dealer and then stopped dealing and became solely a collector, I should say. And when he did that, he said, they were saying that back when I was dealing, is these cards, nobody's going to care about these cards soon because all the people who watch them are going to die. Now, I understand that line of thinking, but Orlando himself is has the #1 set on the PSA set registry for the Goodwin Champion set. Now, the Goodwin Champion set is from the 1800s. Now, Orlando was not around to watch those players, but Orlando has been collecting those for a while. And you say, well, yeah, a few people might be interested in them, but the mass amount of people aren't going to care. Well, if the supply is insanely low, like it is for the Goodwin Champions cards, I mean, if you look at cards from the turn of the century, you look at the pop reports, there might be, in some cases, 10 or 20 of a card, let alone, tens of thousands in a PSA 10, like there would be of, a Ken Griffey Jr. Upper Deck card. So it doesn't take a lot of people to keep the price up if the supply is insanely low. So one of the counter arguments I would have to someone thinking that vintage cards are going to plummet in value is, but wait a second. There are a lot of cards. There aren't many people that are alive, if any, that watched, Tris Speaker play, or Ty Cobb play, or Babe Ruth play. There are some, but not many. But their cards are still insanely valuable. Well, why are they insanely valuable? Well, somebody must care about these players before they were able to watch them. So if you have a King Kelly card that's worth thousands and thousands of dollars and nobody is alive that watched King Kelly play, why has it got value? Well, number one, it at least has some demand, and it has such a low supply that, yeah, it's, it's going to have value. The equilibrium price of where those two things meet is pretty high. I think that there will always be some interest in the history of things like baseball and cards and sports. And as long as the supply is low. Now, if you wanted to make the argument, or somebody wanted to make the argument, that a, 1972 Tom Seaver card is not going to have a lot of value in 50 years, I could go, I could see that, because there's a pretty high supply and it would take a pretty high amount of demand to keep the values up. But when the supply is really low of anything, it doesn't take a lot of people to be interested in owning it and interested in learning about it in order to keep it valuable. So you might be right. Mickey Mantle cards might plummet, but I've also been at card shows where literally I've seen little kids come running up to a case and look in the case and go, oh my gosh, it's a Mickey Mantle card. So if there are little kids that know the name Mickey Mantle and know that that's something special, there's at least some kids out there doing that, because I've seen it with my own eyes. But could they plummet? Sure. Will they plummet? Maybe. But the cards with the lowest supply, it's going to take almost no demand for those to become worthless and plummet in value. Pre-war or golden age? I would probably lean towards the golden age as the number of recognizable players from the era. I think that there will still be a demand for the pre-war, but the vast majority of collectors will look to have just a card or two from pre-war in their collection as a novelty as opposed to the focus of their collection. Scarcity, quality, and lack of name recognition will probably push the pre-war cards to realms of relative obscurity, whereas the Golden Age has pre-war beat in every aspect, as collectors in 15 to 20 years will be more in tune with nostalgic influence of their grandfathers. Heck, in 15 to 20, we might even see the resurgence of the junk wax era, where our kids are chasing many examples from like the 1987 Bonds or 89 Griffey as possible, like we did 30 years ago. There are enough to go around. So, great comment once again, and I think that argument about the, golden era, the golden age of baseball is really where the demand will stay. I think that it makes sense, and I think that part of it is what is mentioned here. It's the recognizable names, the recognizable people, right? And, you hear Ernie Banks, and you hear Al Kaline, and Clemente, and Mays, and Mantle, and Maris, and Aaron, and you hear these names, and they are recognizable. So why are they more recognizable than the names from, the T206 and T205 and T207 sets? I think that the thing that the golden era of baseball and cards really have going for them is it's not, I don't think, this is just me. Again, we're just sharing ideas here. No facts, just opinions. But I don't think that the reason that these guys are more recognizable is because there are people that are still living that watch them play. I don't think that's the reason. I think the reason is because we have so much footage, video footage of them. You could watch hours of video footage of Mickey Mantle highlights and Willie Mays highlights. You can say, hey, the catch, the Willie Mays catch, and most people can see in their mind, they can see him running back, reaching over, making the catch, his hat falling off, turning and throwing. Most people can see it because they saw it. Most people can close their eyes and they can see Hank Aaron's record-breaking home run and the two guys running out on the field because we've seen that video clip. A lot of the things, Yogi Berra running out and jumping on Don Larson after the perfect game, like Jackie Robinson stealing home, These are things that we've seen and we can continue to see. But if you look up, Cy Young pitching highlights, there's a little bit of grainy footage, but not a lot. Not a lot. So do I think Ernie Banks is going to get forgotten and Mickey Mantle is going to get forgotten? No, because we can watch them play right now. We could take out our phone, we could take out our tablet, we could take out our computer, we could type into a Google search and see tons and tons of highlights and interviews and interactions. I don't think it's because my dad was alive and got to watch Ernie Banks. That's not why I like Ernie Banks. I like Ernie Banks because I saw interviews with him and I saw his big smile and how happy and nice he was. I remember seeing games where he was at Wrigley, at the field, and he's walking around the stands shaking hands with people and seeing the highlights of him hitting home runs and making plays. Like, that's the reason that I know Ernie Banks way more than I know Trish Speaker. It's not because my dad is here to tell me stories about Ernie Banks. It's because I could watch Ernie Banks. It's not as easy to watch Ty Cobb. There's some footage, but there's not a lot. I think the recognizability comment is a great comment, but I think the reason that they're recognizable is because we can watch them play anytime we want from anywhere. Golden Age cards will be in more demand because they are more accessible, and you don't have to own a big card to have an Aaron, Mays, Clemente in your collection. I think that as some collectors spend more time in the hobby, they shift towards pre-war and older oddball cards because they provide new collecting challenges and interests. When collectors start spending more time in the hobby, they get greater exposure to some of those older cards. I find that to be the case with me right now. I think that is a fantastic comment. The affordability and the ability to obtain a card of Hank Aaron or Willie Mays or even Mickey Mantle or Roberto Clemente. I mean, I do these videos a couple of times a month, right? Where I talk about cards that sold for under $50 from the previous month in recent eBay auctions. And pretty much every single time I do one, there are some Mays, there are some Clemente, there are some Aarons, there are some Banks, there are a lot of the best players. And so regardless of your budget, you can participate in collecting those players. Sure, it might be a 68 Hank Aaron and not a 55. It might be a 65 Ernie Banks and not a 54. But you still can pretty easily obtain an Ernie Banks card or a Willie Mays card or a Hank Aaron or a Roberto Clemente or a Sandy Koufax or a Whitey Ford or a Yogi Berra. So I think one of the reasons there's more interest in that era is because it's more affordable and you can be involved. If we start talking about guys like, Cap Anson, and we start talking about guys like, King Kelly, or we start talking about guys like Ty Cobb or Walter Johnson or Christy Mathewson or, Johnny Evers or whoever it is from the turn of the century time, it's really expensive for any card in any condition. So prices are higher for those pre-war cards. Not always, not, a Mantle rookie or something, but for the average player, the average Hall of Famer, the mid-tier Hall of Famer is very affordable in cards from the 1960s. It's less affordable from cards around 1900. Now, some of them are still affordable. I mean, heck, I bought a T206 Hall of Fame rookie card at the Strongsville show, and it was under $300. So it is possible, but it's not a name that if you said it to the average person on the street, they would recognize. But they would recognize Hank Aaron, and they would probably recognize Ernie Banks or Whitey Ford. So yeah, I could see the demand continuing to be higher. But because the supply is so much higher for cards in the 50s and 60s, especially low grade, it's going to continue to have to require a lot of demand in order for the prices to continue where they are and continue to go up. But like I mentioned earlier, if there's a card that, is a 1928 ice cream card of, just about any name, it doesn't take a lot of people to want it to keep the price high, because in some of those, it's like each player is like a pop 4. So population matters. It's not the only thing that matters, but it matters. But as far as the demand, if I walked into the National, I polled people, what decade are you planning on buying cards from at this show? I definitely think in conclusion that in 15 or 20 years, more people will say the 1950s and the 1960s than they'll say the 1910s and 1920s. What will happen to the price? I don't know. But what will happen to the majority or the larger group of people who are geared up to find cards and hunt cards and collect cards, I think it's fair to say that the 50s and 60s will have more people participating than people in the, first 25 years of the, 20th century. So that brings us to our question for next week. On Friday, I had an interview, a conversation with Ray from Philly, who runs the Baseball Card Hall of Fame. And he has 40 cards on the ballot each year. And every year, the top 10 get into the Baseball Card Hall of Fame, and the bottom 5 drop off. That leaves us with 25 cards that are on this year's ballot that will also be on next year's ballot. That opens up 15 new spots. So my question is, if you were to pick a card or 2 cards that you think should be on next year's ballot, list those 2 cards for me in the comments and tell me why you think those 2 cards are worthy of being in the Baseball Card Hall of Fame. Now, if you've not yet watched the video from Friday and my conversation with Ray, I really hope that you do. But more importantly, if there's anything I'm trying to do with my channel, I'm trying to encourage people to participate in being a part of the community. And the baseball card community is not only a place for people who make videos to participate. It's a place where I think everyone should be participating. It's why I encourage you to leave comments to the questions like I'm asking right now, and ask me questions where I can give my opinion on things like I do on Wednesdays. It's one of the reasons I ask you to, leave comments in any of the videos that I put together, is because I think it's more fun when we participate. If you've not yet participated in casting your ballot for the Baseball Card Hall of Fame, I'm going to again put the link down below in the description. Just click on the link. It's really, really easy. You get to vote on 10. Click on those 10, submit your ballot, and you're done. It won't take you more than 3 or 4 minutes. So with that said, I encourage you to participate in the ballot for this year, and down below in the comments, put a list of 1 or 2, maybe even 3 cards that you'd like to see on next year's ballot. And next week, I'll share with all of you all of the suggestions that you made about potential cards to be on the Baseball Card Hall of Fame ballot for 2025.